Cheers, guys. Apex911, welcome to the Elitist Geek. I want to do a review this episode. I've done some reviews in the past, but it's been a long time. And actually, a fellow YouTuber did a fantastic review on Final Fantasy X. And while we maybe don't agree on Final Fantasy X, yes, we both think it's a great game, but for different reasons. I thought I'd do a review about the Final Fantasy that really got me away from being the elitist snob gamer that I was to the more inclusive gamer that I am now. And, you know, let's just add as a caveat, yes, I can still be a freaking arrogant snob at times, but for the most part, my gaming library has expanded like 100-fold. Because I'm open to different experiences that I maybe wasn't a while ago. You guys, anyone who's watched my videos knows that up until about 2005, 2006 actually, I was the elitist geek in practice and in name. Anyways, that changed when a friend of mine got me to try Final Fantasy XII. And he said, look, this is a title that, for me, takes the best elements of JRPGs and melds them with the best elements of Western RPGs, or CRPGs. And I say CRPGs because most Western RPGs are computer-based as opposed to console-based. In other words, they find their first life on a PC and then get pushed over to console. Yes, there are exceptions, but in the West, by and large, 99.9% of RPGs are PC-centric RPGs. All right. So this game, Final Fantasy XII, and here it is, was the game that changed it for me. And I'm going to include footage playing, but we're going to do it in an inset window on one of these. Here's the disc. The manual, you know, while not fantastic by, you know, yesteryear's standards, it was still a manual, and at a time when a lot of games were starting to skimp on manuals already. You get, what is it, a 42-page, well, let's say 38 pages of actual information, which is not bad, right? Now, what is it about this game that is so special to me? Because it's not a lot of people's favorite Final Fantasy. In fact, a lot of the hardcore Final Fantasy fans rate this as one of the lowest gameplay experiences for them. Not me. In terms of the Final Fantasies, and now I have played them all, with the exception of the sequels to 13, right? I've played every single Final Fantasy through to completion, and I still stand by this being the best title. Let's get into why. All right. It goes to what the heart of an RPG is for me. And for me, an RPG is a fantastic storyline, right? With an open world in the respect that you don't just have to follow the storyline, all right? That's huge for me in a role-playing game. And the reason it's such a huge big deal for me is I've always been a min-maxer, right, in RPGs. I'm an itemization whore. I love items. The more the merrier. And one of the games that I'm going to talk about in the future, Might and Magic series, was the first computer role-playing game in the 80s that really delivered on the item front. There were so many items, and that all comes back to pen and paper Dungeons & Dragons for me. Dungeons & Dragons has pretty unlimited amount of magic items and weapons that you can wield and amass and sell and buy. And, you know, the magic items that were listed in the Dungeon Master's Guide or the Monster Manual Guide, those were just ideas, right? Those were the staples. But most good GMs, me included, we went way beyond that list. And a good CRPG for me is one that delivers with a multitude of items. So vast that you could have two fighters completely outfitted differently, with different strengths as a result of the different items that they choose. There are no cookie cutters in a good CRPG for me. All right. Final Fantasy XII delivered in that respect. It had a ton of items, and part of the reason why I like a world that's not strictly linear is because everybody has those monsters that at the beginning of an RPG give you a shit ton of frustration, right? In a lot of CRPGs, the joke is that those are giant rats, kobolds, orcs, goblins. You get my drift. You know, you're low-level monsters that try to kill you, and usually successfully do when you're level 1. There is nothing more satisfying in an RPG for me than to go back with a high-level party with high-level items and kick the absolute living snot turd out of those creatures that once gave you trouble. Conversely, there is nothing more satisfying than taking your decked out party and going into an area that should be way above your pay grade and level and surviving and actually looting treasure that you should not be seeing for another 4, 5, 6 levels. That to me is an RPG that delivers, and I'd always had that with Elder Scrolls games up until Oblivion. Actually, I shouldn't say Oblivion. Yes, Oblivion, but Oscuros, which was a famous mod, prevented that scaling, right? And what scaling is, and how a lot of RPGs, I'm going to quickly go into that because it is important to this. When monsters scale to your level, they basically go up in strength as you go up in strength. So those same giant rats that pissed you off at level 1 are going to piss you off at level 20 or 30 because they go up with your proportionate strength, or proportionately with your strength, right? That ruins the immersion for me. I want my high-level party to go back and one-shot those little mothers and kill them quickly and ruthlessly, so that the last thing they see as you end their lives is you, because they once did that to you. So for me, that's huge. And you don't get that, you don't tend to get that in linear, strictly story-driven games like Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy XII, on the other hand, delivered in that respect. Lots of items, check. Open world where you could try to tackle things above your level / pay grade, check. Lots of variety, check. Huge and vastly different sets of terrain, dungeons, towns, check, check, and check. It delivered on all those fronts. What are some of the things that I like about JRPGs that I maybe didn't like or didn't find I was getting in a CRPG? We'll go into that too. Because for me, the strength of a good JRPG is its storytelling ability. Characters that you really care about, right? That grow on you. And Chrono Trigger was fantastic for that. That was the other first RPG that got me into liking console RPGs, because it also delivered in that front. And it wasn't too linear, right? Admittedly, some of the tropes are a little tiring. How many JRPGs start you off as the kid on his summer holiday sleeping in and having mom call you to come down for breakfast? Way too many. And that drives me fucking nuts, because I'm a 43-year-old man and I like to role play other men, right? As opposed to boys. So that helped perpetuate that stereotype for me right into my 30s. I was convinced that JRPGs catered to kids because of those tropes, because of the way they commonly handled the start of JRPGs. How wrong I was, and how glad I am at how wrong I was, because it's really opened that library up for me, right? The other thing that I like about JRPGs is not just the commitment to a good story and the commitment to your characters, it's the commitment to a good villain. And there's nothing more satisfying than have a villain showing up during the storyline that you have to deal with. Now, admittedly, Final Fantasy XII didn't do that in the same way as some other JRPGs, but it delivered enough of that. You got enough of the flavor of the antagonist to propel your protagonist group on, right? So for me, Final Fantasy XII, if I was going to summarize, I would say Final Fantasy XII is the perfect blending of things that I like in a Western CRPG with the things that I like in a JRPG. The whole hunt system in Final Fantasy XII was fantastic because it let you do exactly that. Everything that I just talked about in a nutshell is the hunt system personified. You could challenge yourself with really, really tough hunts, and if you were successful, reap the rewards of those to help you with the storyline. The world itself is really fleshed out in terms of cultures. You feel like you're running into different cultures, whether it's the desert area, whether it's some of the sky cities, whether it's your hometown or home city, if you want to call it that. They all have a unique flavor. And the combat system itself is another plus for me. If I had my way 100% of the time, it would be traditional turn-based combat. That's another thing that I love about JRPGs, is for the most part they've kept that, or they've done an active time or pause-based system, similar to Baldur's Gate, right? Is what Final Fantasy XII has done, where you can pause the game, you can give orders, but it still simulates a turn-based system. And before the recent renaissance that we've had with Wasteland 2, the upcoming Bard's Tale, that have been bringing Western CRPGs back to the turn-based philosophy, we were really moving to real-time combat, and I'm okay with that. You know, I love Skyrim because it's so diverse and I can mod the living snot out of it. And the combat system works for Skyrim. It's a first-person game. It's immersive, that the real-time helps that. But an over-the-shoulder, party-based style games, I love my turn-based, or at least simulated turn-based. And that's, again, what Final Fantasy XII does really well. And lastly, length of gameplay. Nothing less satisfying to me than a game that I can rush through in 8 to 10 hours. If it's a platformer, no problem with that. If it's a one-off strategy game that has the potential for more games, like a Civilization V, where a single game could last me, 10 to 20 hours, but I can really replay it infinitely because I can choose different settings each time, I'm okay with that. But an RPG? Hell no. Hell no. I want a minimum of 25 to 30 hours in my RPG. And again, Final Fantasy XII delivers in that respect, giving me close to 70 or 80 hours by the time I was finished. And I wouldn't say I'm 100% completionist, but I do try to do a lot of the side quests that appeal to me, right? And that was far from doing every single side quest, and I was close to 80 hours, just to give you a sense. Could it be done quicker? Absolutely. I have no doubt Final Fantasy XII could be won within 40 to 60 hours if you just muscled through the storyline. Probably faster. There's probably quick plays of guys doing it in the teens of hours. That would not surprise me, right? But what about the characters themselves? So those are the main differences. We talked about CRPGs and JRPGs, but what about the characters themselves? Well, the characters themselves are diverse enough. You've got the coming-of-age teenager, of course, with Vaughn. You've got, your adults. You've got your veterans. And I'm not going to get into the details of all those for anybody who hasn't played it. I don't want to spoil that, so we won't get into those specific story elements. But suffice it to say, there's enough diversity in your characters that you can see this through at least one of your character's eyes, that most approximates you in personality or temperament. And that's another cool thing. And yeah, what can I say? Final Fantasy XII, if you have not picked this up yet, here it is again for the PlayStation 2. I've seen it for as cheap as $12. You have to pick this up. Do yourself a favor. Even, yes, if you like linear gameplay, you have to pick this up and give it a shot. And if you do, let me know what you guys think. One last thing I do want to mention is how you go about playing this game. I strongly, strongly recommend that you use the PlayStation 2 emulator, EPSXE, I believe. Oh no, that's the PlayStation 1 emulator. I'm totally drawing a blank here. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to type this in, guys. PlayStation 2 emulator. And it's going to come, yeah, PCSX2, of course. How could I forget? So PCSX2 is the best way to currently play this. Definitely buy the media. You know, if you can. Yes, there's ROMs out there, and this video is not about how to find those ROMs, but preferably you own the game. You can put it in your disk drive, use that emulator, and play the game at 1080p, which, when you crank up all the settings on PCSX2, makes the game very palatable and easy to play in 2015, because you'll be playing it at 1080p with all kinds of anisotropic filtering, anti-aliasing setup, and won't feel like you're playing an almost 10-year-old game. So that would be my preference. Failing that, if you've got a PlayStation 3 with backwards compatibility, that would be my second recommendation. And lastly, would be playing this natively on a PlayStation 2. But that would be my last recommendation. So again, emulator, PlayStation 3 emulation because of the upscaling that it does, and finally PlayStation 2 if you can't, right? So there you have it, guys. As always, until the next video, cheers.